I think the story was printed that there was a tunnel going from Jack's house, which is near my house.
Born in 1937, Warren Beatty turned 90 in 2027, an occasion marking a career that spans more than 6 decades across the disciplines of acting, writing, directing, and producing. His professional trajectory effectively bridges the traditional, highly controlled studio system of early American cinema and the insurgent, director-driven energy of the new Hollywood era. Beatty is recognized as much as a symbol of modern American film as he is a dedicated student of its history. According to a Film International profile, Beatty revered classical filmmakers such as Frank Capra and David Lean. Yet he consistently sought to innovate beyond their established frameworks, serving as a transitional figure between old Hollywood and the new American cinema. His foundational on-screen presence began with his role as a brooding young lover in the 1961 production Splendor in the Grass. By 1967, he had transitioned into a producer, championing countercultural narratives like Bonnie and Clyde, a project that altered how the industry depicted violence and social rebellion. He subsequently reimagined the structural conventions of the Western in the 1971 film McCabe and Mrs. Miller. In 1974, he addressed the pervasive political paranoia of the decade in the Parallax View. His directorial and production efforts continued to expand in scope, ranging from the 1978 metaphysical fantasy Heaven Can Wait to the sweeping 1981 historical epic Reds, and later, the 1998 acerbic political satire Bulworth. Beatty has identified these 7 films as his personal favorites. They stand as works he shepherded both on the screen and behind the camera. Number 7. Splendor in the Grass. Warren Beatty's first feature film, Splendor in the Grass, was released in 1961 when the actor was 24 years old.
I'd like to go away to a good agricultural college for a couple of years. I'd really like to do that, Dad.
Written by established playwright William Ing and directed by Elia Kazan, the coming-of-age drama is situated in the conservative environment of 1920s Kansas. The narrative centers on 2 teenagers, Deanie Loomis, portrayed by Natalie Wood, and Bud Stamper, played by Beatty. Their intense romance is ultimately obstructed and dismantled by rigid social expectations and intense familial pressure. The film's title is drawn directly from William Wordsworth's poem, Ode Intimations of Immortality, which Deanie's English teacher formally recites during a scene in the film. The verses state, "Though nothing can bring back the hour of splendor in the grass, of glory in the flower, we will grieve not, rather find strength in what remains behind."
Though nothing can bring back the hour of splendor in the grass.
Throughout the film, these specific lines serve as a thematic refrain for characters attempting to reconcile the emotional volatility of their youth with the stark responsibilities of adulthood. Prior to this production, Beatty was not an established cinematic star. Archival records from Turner Classic Movies indicate that screenwriter William Ing specifically recommended Beatty to the studio after observing his performances on television. Kazan subsequently approved the casting, noting that Beatty possessed a distinct, dangerous quality suited for the camera. The resulting film was highly unusual for its era, due to its frank portrayal of emerging sexuality and subsequent mental breakdown, rigorously exploring the tragic consequences of emotional and psychological repression. On-screen, Beatty's character, Bud, experiences a profound internal conflict. He is divided between his genuine affection for Deanie and the immovable expectation of his father, who demands that Bud marry within his own established social and economic class. The emotional weight of this conflict is evident in a pivotal sequence where Bud informs Deanie that he loves her but can no longer maintain their relationship, effectively conveying a mixture of resignation and fear. In another critical scene, Bud reads the Wordsworth stanza aloud, his voice audibly cracking as he vocalizes the permanent conclusion of their youthful bliss. The film's thematic core is further articulated when Deanie's physician speaks to her parents, stating plainly, "I think she's going to get well, but she's going to be different from what she was." Number 6. Bonnie and Clyde. In 1967, Warren Beatty produced and starred in Bonnie and Clyde, a project that cemented his status as a filmmaker capable of shifting industry paradigms. The narrative was inspired by the documented history of Depression-era bank robbers Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow. The film co-starred Faye Dunaway as Bonnie.
I can't get... She's Buck's wife.
Well, then get rid of them both.
Why? What's the matter with you anyway?
She is what's the matter with me. She's on the...
For this project, Beatty operated as both lead actor and primary producer, taking on the task of persuading Warner Brothers to finance a picture that many studio executives considered excessively violent. The promotional marketing embraced this controversy. The official poster tagline read, "They're young, they're in love, and they kill people." This marketing mirrored Clyde's blunt on-screen declaration, "We rob banks."
We rob banks.
Through this dialogue, the characters explicitly announce their violent rejection of an economic system that has entirely failed them. Directed by Arthur Penn, the film's visual and editing style represented a deliberate synthesis of French New Wave techniques and traditional American cinematic sensibilities. A contemporary essay regarding the film details how Penn effectively merged genres, combining elements of romance, comedy, and brutal physical violence. The structure alternates rapidly between highly lyrical scenes of the fugitive lovers traveling on the open road and abrupt, shocking sequences of point-blank executions. The narrative frames the characters as societal misfits, actively dreaming of an elevated existence while surrounded by the bleak economic realities of the Great Depression. Penn later clarified that his intention was to design the film as a post-Kennedy, Vietnam-era reflection on the terminal decline of the American dream. Beatty's creative decisions heavily influenced this layered approach. During a detailed 2012 interview, Beatty explained his specific strategy of utilizing humor and physical violence in tandem to manipulate the audience's emotional state. He described showing the lovers sharing quiet, tender moments of connection, and then executing a sudden, jarring editorial cut to graphic images of bullets penetrating human flesh, heavily amplified by the aggressive sound design. This deliberate juxtaposition was intended to force a viewing experience that would make an audience laugh, only to immediately jolt them with visceral horror. The film's climax remains a definitive sequence in film history. Following a brief, quiet moment where Bonnie and Clyde exchange a smile, they are ambushed by law enforcement. The ensuing execution is depicted in prolonged, slow motion, with the audio track restricted entirely to the deafening roar of concentrated gunfire and the ambient sound of birdsong. Number 5. McCabe and Mrs. Miller. By the early 1970s, Warren Beatty sought to deconstruct another foundational cinematic genre. The resulting project was the 1971 release McCabe and Mrs. Miller, a revisionist western directed by Robert Altman and adapted from Edmund Naughton's novel McCabe. Beatty portrays the titular John McCabe, a small-time gambler who arrives in a freezing, perpetually snow-covered mining settlement with the intention of building and operating a brothel. Julie Christie co-stars as Constance Miller, a highly pragmatic, business-minded madam who partners with McCabe professionally and becomes his lover.
Of course, we'd have to have an immediate answer on that.
Well, monsieur, the immediate answer to that would be no.
The production systematically subverts established tropes of the traditional Western genre. The central protagonist is not a stoic gunslinger, but rather a nervous, posturing entrepreneur. The geographical setting abandons the sun-baked desert landscapes of classic Westerns in favor of a town drenched in freezing rain, deep mud, and heavy snow. Furthermore, the primary engine of the narrative is not honor but ruthless corporate capitalism. The National Film Preservation Board has officially classified the picture as an anti-Western, noting its rigorous examination of frontier mythology, capitalist expansion, and human desire. The board highlights Altman's utilization of Leonard Cohen's mournful acoustic tracks to underscore the movie's deep, pervasive melancholy. Visually, cinematographer Vilmos Zsigmond employed a highly specific flashing technique, a process of deliberately underexposing the physical film stock prior to shooting. This chemical alteration created a muted, golden, and distinctly dreamlike visual atmosphere that defined the film's aesthetic. Altman's signature directorial hallmarks, specifically his use of overlapping, naturalistic dialogue and unsentimental editing, ground the narrative, making the frontier settlement feel genuinely lived in and chaotic. The script's dialogue is characteristically laconic, but highly expressive. A definitive exchange occurs when McCabe attempts to convince Mrs. Miller of his physical toughness and business acumen. She immediately dismisses his posturing with a proverb that serves as a thesis for the film. If a frog had wings, he wouldn't bump his ass so much. The line asserts the uselessness of wishful thinking in the face of harsh reality. Later in the narrative, when McCabe finally realizes the corporate mining syndicate has dispatched out professional assassins to eliminate him, he desperately attempts to plead for a peaceful negotiation. The narrative concludes with a stark sequence. McCabe is fatally wounded, dying alone in a snowbank, while Mrs. Miller remains completely removed from the violence, lost in an opium haze inside her establishment. Number 4. The Parallax View. 3 years following his revisionist Western, Warren Beatty starred in a production that directly captured the acute, systemic paranoia of post-Watergate America. The Parallax View, released in 1974 and directed by Alan J. Pakula, follows the trajectory of investigative journalist Joe Frady, portrayed by Beatty. Frady becomes dangerously entangled in an investigation of the Parallax Corporation, a shadowy, extra-governmental corporate entity that actively recruits sociopaths to operate as assassins, targeting specific political candidates.
Galetta was a known lush. He hit a piling on the George Washington Bridge. He killed 3 other people with him. Joy Holder died of anaphylactic shock when the doctor gave her the wrong antibiotic.
The narrative directly taps into the widespread, culturally entrenched conspiracy theories that proliferated following the high-profile political assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr. Frady's relentless pursuit of evidence pulls him into a complex, labyrinthine plot, ultimately culminating in his own meticulously orchestrated framing and subsequent murder. A critical review published in Film International notes that the movie emerged organically from a period of profound cultural cynicism generated by the Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal. The review details how Pakula utilized highly deliberate, bold geometric compositions and an expressionist visual quality to physically convey the sensation of paranoia and surveillance on screen. The analysis emphasizes that the script rarely states its political context through overt exposition. Rather, an atmosphere of deep cynicism is allowed to saturate the visual framing of every scene. Pakula approached the narrative as a modern American myth populated by archetypal figures, utilizing a wide cinematic canvas and stark architectural visuals to physically isolate the individual characters within the frame. The film relies on dialogue that highlights the absurdity of institutional power. A defining sequence takes place during a formal congressional investigation, where an official press secretary addresses a room of reporters regarding a senator's recent assassination. The official firmly states, "There is no conspiracy, and if there were, I would not be at liberty to discuss it." The statement epitomizes the manner in which official, state-sanctioned narratives are utilized to dismiss and neutralize legitimate public concern. In a later scene, Frady's journalistic colleague, Lee Carter, questions the limits of their investigation, asking, "If you didn't see it, it's not there?" Frady, refusing to abandon the inquiry, successfully infiltrates the Parallax Corporation's internal training program. During this infiltration, he is subjected to a psychological brainwashing montage. The sequence forces Frady to watch a rapid, aggressive flashing of images that inextricably link extreme physical violence, traditional American patriotism, and modern consumerism. The film concludes with severe finality. Frady is shot and killed while attempting to disrupt a planned assassination. Number 3, Heaven Can Wait. Transitioning away from the oppressive bleakness of the paranoia thriller, Warren Beatty returned to the genres of comedy and metaphysical fantasy with the 1978 release Heaven Can Wait. Beatty co-directed the feature alongside Buck Henry.
Sure. Very good, sir. And you mean I'm gonna sound like this guy no matter what I talk like?
The film functions as a modernized remake of the 1941 picture Here Comes Mr. Jordan. Beatty takes on the central role of Joe Pendleton, a professional quarterback for the Los Angeles Rams who is prematurely extracted from his body and escorted to the afterlife by an inexperienced, well-meaning angel. Upon discovering the administrative error, celestial supervisor Mr. Jordan, portrayed with authoritative calm by James Mason, is tasked with locating a suitable new biological vessel for Joe on Earth. Joe is temporarily placed into the body of Leo Farnsworth, a ruthlessly wealthy industrialist who, moments prior, had been successfully murdered by his own wife and her secret lover. Operating within Farnsworth's body, Joe attempts to physically train to resume his professional football career, while simultaneously attempting to win the affection of environmental activist Betty Logan, played by Julie Christie. Beneath its farcical, high-concept premise, the script engages directly with themes of predetermined destiny, human mortality, and personal integrity. A central philosophical tenet of the film is articulated by the character of Mr. Jordan, who observes, "The likelihood of one individual being right increases in direct proportion to the intensity with which others are trying to prove him wrong." This principle applies directly to Joe, who faces constant, unanimous resistance to his assertion that he will reclaim his status as a professional quarterback, yet his internal conviction only solidifies. Furthermore, the narrative functions as a gentle but pointed mockery of extreme corporate greed. Utilizing Farnsworth's vast, unearned wealth, Joe begins aggressively investing in green environmental projects and systematically dismantling the unethical corporate practices of his own company. An analytical piece by Widescreenings identifies the picture as a pioneering fantasy romance that provides psychological comfort to the audience by fundamentally suggesting that human consciousness survives physical death. The execution relies on sharp comedic timing. A standout sequence occurs when Joe, currently inhabiting the physical form of the elderly billionaire, attempts to privately convince his former football coach of his true identity during a formal dinner. Joe blurts out his detailed knowledge of the team's playbook. The coach stares in utter confusion before replying deadpan, "Leo, we don't even own a football team." A crucial directorial decision was made regarding the film's visual language. Regardless of which physical body Joe is currently inhabiting within the narrative, the viewing audience always sees Warren Beatty's face on screen. Number 2. Reds. In the early 1980s, Warren Beatty committed to the most logistically and historically ambitious project of his career, Reds. Released in 1981, the film is a sprawling historical epic detailing the life of radical American journalist John Reed and his direct documentation of the Russian Revolution. Beatty conceived the project, secured the financing, produced, directed, co-wrote, and starred in the film, which features a runtime exceeding 3 hours.
No one on
half of Frena's people would come in.
Louise, please keep her quiet, will you?
The narrative closely tracks the complex, intertwined lives of John Reed, played by Beatty, feminist writer Louise Bryant, portrayed by Diane Keaton, and cynical playwright Eugene O'Neill, played by Jack Nicholson, setting their personal relationships against a backdrop of massive global political upheaval. The structural framework of the script carefully juxtaposes the intimate details of a romantic partnership with the massive scale of a violent proletarian revolution, specifically examining how deeply held ideological commitments test and fracture human relationships. Upon its release, the film's critical reception heavily praised its intellectual rigor and massive cinematic scope. Film critic Roger Ebert championed the picture, categorizing it as a work of glorious romanticism, intelligence, and wit, and labeling it the thinking man's Dr. Zhivago. Ebert's assessment noted that the primary focus of the film was less about the granular, biographical minutiae of Reed's daily life, and more about capturing the exhilarating, dangerous momentum of the revolution itself. Ebert highlighted Beatty's specific acting choices, noting the irony and human vulnerability he brought to the portrayal of a historical radical, while praising Keaton for depicting Louise Bryant as an entirely independent, intellectually formidable thinker. The review also contextualized the sheer difficulty of the production, reminding the public that Beatty successfully managed to raise $35 million from major Hollywood studios to fund a sympathetic biographical epic about a dedicated communist revolutionary. A defining structural element of Reds is the integration of documentary-style witness interviews. Beatty interspersed the dramatic narrative with real, on-camera interviews featuring elderly historical figures who had personally known Reed and Bryant during the 1910s and 1920s, anchoring the dramatic recreation in verifiable documentary authenticity. The scripted dialogue remains sharply political. The anarchist Emma Goldman, portrayed by Maureen Stapleton, delivers a concise critique of the democratic process, stating plainly, "I think voting is the opium of the masses." In a separate sequence addressing American economics, Reed delivers a monologue dissecting capitalist profiteering. J.P. Morgan and the rest of them are not satisfied with controlling the banks, the railroads, and the government. They want control of the free press because that's where the real power is. Eugene O'Neill functions as the cynical counterpoint to Reed's idealism, providing wry, bitter commentary on Bryant and Reed's tumultuous affair. A historical film blog highlights a specific exchange where O'Neill bluntly tells Bryant, "I'd like to kill you, but I can't. So you can do whatever you want to except not see me." Number 1, Bulworth. Nearly 2 decades after completing his historical epic, Warren Beatty returned to the role of director for a project that merged broad physical comedy with incendiary political commentary. The 1998 release Bulworth centers on the character of U.S. Senator J. Billington Bulworth, a long-standing Democratic incumbent who has fallen into a state of severe clinical depression brought on by the moral emptiness of his legislative career.
If I'm not dead by Monday morning, I'm going to stop payment on that check.
The narrative establishes that Bulworth has systematically sold his voting record to corporate insurance lobbyists, authorized the production of vacuous campaign advertisements, and fully accepted that he has betrayed his foundational political ideals. Driven to absolute despair, he initiates a $10 million life insurance policy on himself and quietly contracts an assassin to end his life, ensuring the financial payout goes to his daughter. Operating under the absolute certainty that his death is imminent, Bulworth completely abandons his carefully curated political persona. He begins aggressively speaking unfiltered truths to his constituents, delivering his complex policy positions through the medium of rap, and launching vicious public attacks against the corporate financing of American elections. This sudden, jarring shift toward complete transparency makes him an overnight media sensation, inadvertently transforming his deep cynicism into a movement of public hope. An analysis published in Headstuff frames the picture as a precise political satire, focusing on the hollow interior lives of elected officials. The article points to a sequence where Bulworth is furiously reprimanded by his chief of staff for systematically offending highly funded special interest groups with blunt, factual statements. The article notes that the film's political thesis directly mirrors the arguments of political theorist Noam Chomsky, specifically the assertion that the United States operates under a single, unified business party, heavily disguised by minor partisan differences and completely dominated by corporate wealth. A separate review by Real Views characterizes Bulworth as a full frontal assault on the shallowness of the political campaign process, observing that Beatty's script explicitly portrays all national politicians as functional employees of large corporate conglomerates. The film illustrates this dynamic in a highly uncomfortable sequence set inside an African-American church. Scheduled to deliver standard campaign platitudes, Bulworth instead discards his prepared speech and bluntly informs the congregation that the federal government possesses absolutely no interest in their welfare. His brutal honesty functions as a cathartic dismantling of political theater. He openly acknowledges the realities of systemic racism, engineered poverty, and corporate media manipulation. The script's dialogue is distinctly acerbic and rhythmically structured. Attending an elite corporate fundraiser, Bulworth improvises a rap that openly mocks his own donors. "Corporate America, I'm your man. The money flows like water, and I'm your dam." Later in the narrative, he directly addresses a room of wealthy Hollywood executives, stating, "You own the movies, you own the networks, you own the press. You got the politicians, they're all in your dress." The 7 films Warren Beatty has identified as his favorites function as significant markers in the evolution of American cinematic production. Each individual project highlights a distinct facet of his artistic methodology and professional ambition. The progression moves from the constrained romantic idealist established in Splendor in the Grass to the boundary-pushing rebel producer who forced Bonnie and Clyde into theaters. It encompasses the methodical deconstruction of genre tropes in McCabe and Mrs. Miller, the distillation of national anxiety in The Parallax View, and the careful balancing of philosophical inquiry and commercial comedy in Heaven Can Wait. The catalog culminates with the massive historical ambition required to execute Reds and the aggressive, unfiltered satire of Bulworth. Taken as a complete body of work, these films map the trajectory of a filmmaker who navigated the rigid structures of Hollywood's golden age, integrated the stylistic innovations of the 1970s auteur movement, and maintained an uncompromising demand for creative autonomy. Throughout this 6-decade tenure, Beatty has consistently utilized the medium to examine structural power and human frailty. His productions methodically investigate the crushing weight of social conformity, the thin line separating the outlaw from the revolutionary, and the functional viability of the American dream in the face of rampant corporate expansion. The films assess the steep personal costs associated with ideological purity and the severe difficulty of maintaining honesty within a compromised political apparatus. Throughout this journey, Beatty has repeatedly asked audiences to grapple with profound questions. How do we navigate love in the face of social pressure? Are rebels heroes or criminals? Is the American dream viable or a myth? Can ordinary citizens challenge corporations and governments? Do second chances exist? Are revolutions worth the cost? Can honesty survive in politics? As he turns 90, Beatty's legacy is defined not merely by his longevity within the industry, but by his documented willingness to leverage his considerable influence to produce challenging, artistically risky material. His stated refusal to blindly emulate the classical filmmakers he admired resulted in a body of work that pushed the boundaries of American storytelling, establishing a cinematic record grounded in rigorous inquiry and structural innovation.